individuals and groups who, in their personal or professional capacity and in peaceful manner, strive to protect and promote human rights relating to the environment, including water, air, land, the flora, and fauna. Environmental defenders remain highly vulnerable and under attack across the globe. Worldwide, environmental defenders face growing assaults and murders in conjunction with increasing intimidation, harassment, stigmatization, and criminalization. At least 3 people a week were killed protecting our environmental rights, while many more are harassed, intimidated, criminalized, and forced from their lands. The Adat Butad Incorporated and the U.S. Embassy Philippines came up this forum because it is a major component of the environmental justice promotion, ending the culture of impunity. It is a project supported by the U.S. Embassy in the Philippines. Our program aims to provide a virtual platform to environmental defenders to explore ways to combat environmental justice in Southeast Asia. The purpose of this one-year project will examine the multiple forms of threats on environmental defenders facing in Southeast Asia and to address some of them through strategies that acknowledge accountability and foster inherent respect for land and nature. So for the first session of our webinar forum, it started with a game-based approach called Kahoot. The participants were invited to play interactively while waiting to start the program. And based on our evaluation form, most of them liked it. Thank you so much. So the participants were also recognized based on their organizations from the different walks of life. The executive director, Nasruddin Piangkusayin, stated that the Adat Butad Incorporated, a non-government and an advocate of climate change adaptation and disaster risk reduction and mitigation and environmental justice in the grassroots, together with its partners like the U.S. Embassy in the Philippines, seek to provide a venue for finding ways to address the problems and gaps by bringing all the stakeholders together for an open discussion on the issues. All of this towards an inclusive and empowering responses to environmental problems. The Cultural Affairs Officer, our dear Miss Nina Lewis, shared her message with facts where she said that in many years, scientists have been predicting the increases of global warming as one of the greatest threats in human civilization. She confirmed that those who defend and protect the environment were increasingly victimized. The U.S. is committed to environmental conservation and human rights, protection, and freedom of speech. Proudly stating that President Biden conveyed 40 leaders all around the world in a virtual summit on climate change to rally the world and tackled on climate crisis and started meetings that demands of science. She hopes that this project will encourage everyone to become responsible stewards of Mother Earth and advocates for fundamental rights. So our first topic, The Convergence of Environmental Justice and Rights by Mr. James R. May. He stated that tribal communities face unique challenges with respect to environmental justice, such as destruction of subsistence fishing resources due to water pollution. Environmental justice movement in US started the day before Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., civil rights advocate, was murdered. The federal government of United States acknowledged that racial discrimination was recurring and was seen in studies year after year in all over the US and continued over the past decade. So the minority groups in the US was more subject to increased environmental pollution. So the idea of environmental justice was to do something about that, he said. In 1994, President Clinton signs into law Executive Order 12898 to provide federal actions to address environmental justice in minority populations and low-income populations. Therefore, when the Donald Trump's administration dismantled environmental justice program, and President Biden's administration has reversed the said actions. So the federal government passed a law to provide a private cause of action. It is a way of bringing the lawsuit against the government to have it more fair and take dignity into account in environmental planning. He also said that the American Bar Association advanced environmental justice principles and considerations in its programs, policies, and activities, including advocating for legislation and policy, and work with all the levels of government to establish environmental justice laws, the regulations, guidelines, policies, and best practices that reflect the right of every human being to dignity and a clean and healthy environment. Lastly, he added that there are 193 UN recognized countries. So about 84 have constitutional recognition to our right to a healthy environment, including Philippines. Okay. And there's continuous conversation of international recognition of environmental justice to a right to a healthy environment. So that's from our first speaker, Professor James Ray. So here we go to the panel of reactors from Mr. Chito Trillanes. He stated that there's no provision of law under the 1987 Constitution that focuses on providing rights to nature. So as an activist, with the provisions of law providing the conservation of environment, seldom see discussions on advocating the rights for the nature. With his experiences of difficulty, even red tagging for human rights and the environment, there are peers that have been killed. The laws and policies in the Philippines sees conflicting. To our next panel of reactor, Mr. Antonio. He says about the problem of enforcement. So the justice system in the Philippines really works very slowly. So the point of concern is the economic versus environment in the Philippines. The financial and economic woes take precedence over the environment. But positively, the air in Manila is better. We ask Mr. James May for his final message to all of us. And he said that caring for environment is also like caring for children. You see? Do the best. Love and help as long as we can. So he also gave some of the reactions, his reactions to our panel reactors. Okay, so his takeaway to Mr. Trillanes was that shared humanity and people who stand up for what's right tend also to be the people who have overcome their fair share of mistreatment by those in power. His reaction to Mr. Antonio that he recognized the economic interest that play and the economic pressures on a society. There were economic forces that make it more challenging to advance environmental justice. And lastly, his reaction to Mr. Sayasif, part of the objective of doing environmental justice is doing what is right and what is fair for everybody, regardless of what status in life. He said that we are all equal worth and all entitled to self-determination. Lastly, we're all in the same boat. Ayan. So that's for Mr. James Ray and the first three panel of reactors. So we came up to an open forum led to us by our Sharia law, Miss Aliyah, Sharia lawyer, Miss Aliyah. So we have here, I just have a guise of the first question. In our global battle against environmental justice, where are we now in our fight in protecting the environment and natural resources in Philippines? So Mr. Trillanes answered the question that he said no applications of their commitments. For instance, he said, in the Paris Agreement, the Philippines has committed for national determined contributions to reduce the emission of carbon dioxide. But even in the presence of renewable energy law, the percentage of applying renewable energy resources is still far away from the target of the country. There is so much need to be so much need of political will on the part of the government. We see some problems on policies anchored on the economics, on consumerism, and at expense of the environment, he said. Another answer from Mr. Antonio, he said, in 1992, when the Earth Summit was conducted in Rio, from that time up to 2015, nothing much was really accomplished. But then we are now looking from the opinion of experts. We're really looking at the climate emergency. We're not really improving. And the situation is getting desperate. We will go now to the part 2 of the program, to our second speaking to grow, conserving natural resources as they form from the basis of our business activities. And we take our social responsibility at the various company locations and towards the employees seriously. We want to continue providing the employees with good jobs and valuable qualifications in the future, and focuses particularly on ensuring the health and safety of the employees. So the status and lessons, she said that up to today, endorsement continues to lay claim on the traditional territories of the Kanding communities, even as the community have won the court case against endorsement. So the status, she said that mining of marble was finally stopped by national and local governments after 10 years of struggle of the Molyo, Amanatnabun, and Amanatun communities in Nusa, Tengara Timur, led by a woman leader named Miss Aleta Bao. So after they won, the communities began to restore customary ties by reviving their customary rituals and other indigenous knowledge and practices. But they follow the development principle of we sell what we create and we will not sell what we cannot create. So the lessons here, communities continue in their struggle to survive after winning one fight. They not only lose time but energy as they focus on defending their territory. Another lesson is that local women will take the lead in protecting what is essential for the survival of their community. So the local communities, when impacted by environmental damage, bear the cost of the damage immediately and in the future. So here we go in the panel of reactors. First to Dr. J. Ray Aluvera. He said, working for a development program along with Matig Salog Manobo in San Fernando, Bukidnon, along doing his thesis on child rearing practices. He sees that the community exists in the Salog River. So the community is in fact an open space formation brought about the flooding of the rivers. So the people used to live now in the mountains surrounding the valley where a school was built, and some of the community therefore decided to live there. Over the past years, it was a beautiful forest then, but it came up now to be no trees at all. So the Manobo and the Monwaon were never spared from such commercially extraction of the natural resource based. Some end up in a violent resistance, even to the point of armed struggle. This is very sad. Against the concessionaires. Some keep their silence and remain passive. He also said that some became collaborators. That leads to polarization, and not only in foreign corporations and indigenous communities. So there you go. It's very sadly, but the development and environmental justice, he said, will not apply without considering the cultural structures of the indigenous community. Respect for self-determination will strengthen in the Constitution, and the IPRA must be held with caution, he said. Next, panel of reactor to Miss Sef Alba Karandang. So, as one of our empowered women, she said that we're not only the only one inhabitants of the planet. There are also about ecological unity and species in interdependence and in Philippine Reef. So their vision is wildlife in people in harmony for a sustainable future to practice in their own unique ways. Lastly, Mr. Terapung Pomun, he said that the impact of the chain in the lower Mekong country is very big problem across the borders. So the Mekong have diverse natural resources such as fishes. But the main problem is the Mekong Dam. And lastly, the local movement were started to stop the dam constructions, and they initiated legal movements and navigation program. So That's all for my 10-minute synthesis for the first day of our very fruitful interaction. Thank you so much. And may I please now ex- uh,
Our speaker this morning will talk about environmental defenders, faith, and the justice system. He is Dr. Antonio G.M. Lavinia. Dean Tony, as he is fondly called, is a teacher, thinker, leader, lawyer, human rights and climate justice advocate, and social entrepreneur. Dean Tony is known for his climate change and environmental expertise and his longtime advocacy of human rights, indigenous peoples' rights, good governance practices, and social entrepreneurship. He has been and is a leader of many Philippine and global institutions and organizations. He is widely published in the fields of law and governance, environment, human rights, social accountability, and social entrepreneurship. He attended Yale Law School for his Master's of Law, focusing on international, environmental law, and policy. We have three reactors on Dean Tony's topic. From Mindanao, we have Esther Kanoi, the director of Kitanglad Integrated NGOs. She is a pioneer in alliance building for ridge to reef ecosystems knowledge, networking, and learning. On lobbying for fair, equitable, and enhanced access to climate financing in support to ecosystems-based adaptation and forest protection and regeneration, and scaling up new areas on multi-stakeholder convergence for disaster preparedness and risk reduction for resilience, general well-being, and sustainable development. She is the project team leader of Green Livelihoods Alliance 2.0 Forest for a Just Future from 2021 to present. From Luzon, we have Attorney Maita Cascolan Andres. Attorney Lourdes Maita Andres is a Cordilleran. She graduated from UP Diliman with a degree of Bachelor of Arts in Political Science and from LSU College of Law. She embarked on her own law practice in 2014, where she was joined by her daughter. She has 29 years of extensive experience in the different branches of the law. From Mekong, we have Mr. Nam Phang Ngo. Mr. Ngo is from Ho Chi Minh City and the principal of Inspire School, Vietnam. He's the founder of Five Safe Fingers Project. He is working at Pilot Lifelink, an MIE fellow, and a Microsoft learning consultant at Microsoft. Dr. Lavinia, you now have the floor.
Thank you, lawyer, for 32 years. And shortly after that, I also became a climate justice lawyer. So also for 30 years, both at the national, local, and the global level, always championing environmental defenders, championing local communities, and particularly indigenous peoples in Mindanao, in Luzon, in the Visayas, as well as all over the world. I do have a unique perspective because I have literally been look at this issue from literally all possible lens. I was and is an environmental activist and climate activist. But I've also been a government official, a top government official of the Philippines, during the time of Fidel V. Ramos. I have worked with indigenous peoples on the ground in Mindanao, in Central Luzon, in the Cordillera, lawyered for them. Up to the present, I'm the lead lawyer for the anti-terror law petition filed by Cordilleran leaders, ETA leaders, Lumad leaders, and Moro leaders that we filed in the Supreme Court. I'm the lawyer of the Lumad teacher that was killed, we think executed by military forces, not armed at all, but a teacher, Chad Book, who was my client, as well as Jurain Ngojo was also my client. So I do practice on the ground. I have negotiated for the Philippines on climate change as a lead negotiator for the Philippines, the Kyoto Protocol, the Copenhagen negotiations, the Paris Agreement. I was the lead negotiator for the Philippine government in these negotiations, always championing also indigenous people's rights and environmental justice in this most global of issues, climate change. So this is something very personal to me. I mean, and if you look at my virtual background, I'm going to use both a PowerPoint, but I will also use my virtual backgrounds to make a statement and to establish my point. So if you look at my background, you will see that this is Luzon, not Mindanao, but these things are happening in Mindanao, what we call development aggression. Why is there a problem of environmental defenders? Because there's a problem of environmental developmental aggression that has a long history in the Philippines and continues to this day. And in fact, it's a global thing. Even the invasion of Russia to Ukraine is partly about development aggression by a powerful country against a smaller country. But the picture I have, I also lawyer for the peoples, the indigenous peoples that are fighting the Kaliwa Dam in the Sierra Madre. That are also being targeted, those peoples are also being targeted by unfortunately, by the government. But as I said, I do have a perspective of the government as well, having been in the government for several times, having negotiated for the government. I'm very active in the Philippine Judicial Academy. I'm the chair of the Jurisprudence and Philosophy Department of the Philippine Judicial Academy, essentially training all our judges. And I'm the author of the environmental law chapters of the bench book, which is what judges rely on when environmental cases come to them. So what I share is from this multiple perspectives. Let me now begin with my PowerPoint. I will talk about fates and fate at the end of this, but I think the starting point is more first the justice system, environmental defenders, and the justice system, and trying to understand. But I think any kind of understanding of environmental defenders and what they are faced with in the Philippines and all over the world. I mean, because I do work, as I said, all over. By the way, I lived in the United States also for 10 years, worked in Washington, D.C. As an international environmental lawyer in the World Resources Institute, with whom I still partner with on many global projects. And I work from there, I actually work in the Mekong River region, in Vietnam, in Cambodia, in China, in Kunming, Yunnan province in China, Laos, Cambodia, and in Thailand. A little bit in Myanmar, not too much. One of my regrets was for now we can't do that, but I would want to work also in Myanmar. Certainly, I've worked with people of Myanmar. I've taught students from Myanmar as well, and we are faced with that same context, the challenge of development aggression, which is sad because development is good, but when development is done aggressively, it is evil. Let's face it, it is evil. Whether it's by corporations or government, when development is done aggressively at the cost of communities, at the cost of nature, that development is evil and is wrong and has to be stopped. We are, of course, have many environmental threats. I mean, biggest environmental threats are green issues, and I'm going to go through those issues and where environmental defenders are threatened. Of course, blue issues, marine and coastal and other water issues, including freshwater issues. You have those threats as well. Brown issues in the cities or in rural areas like mining is a big threat, usually accompanied by all of this, usually accompanied by human rights challenges because of the social conflict that development aggression generates. And then there are black environmental issues, existential issues like climate change, like biodiversity extinction, like mining in many of our islands in the Philippines, like war in Ukraine and war in or the Middle East, or war in Africa, war in Myanmar. When the violence becomes so big, right? So central that it occupies everything already. It's the center of everything already. And then, of course, these environmental threats how cannot be separated from what we just experienced. What we are experiencing, because it's not yet over, but what we experienced the last 2 years, which is the pandemic, which most likely is caused by environmentally, by misuse of species, by bad use, by bad management of ecosystems. In my presentation, there will be a special focus on land conflict because so much of the violence that we see, the attacks against environmental defenders are because of conflict of land and land use. Agriculture, for example, versus mining. The use of water that would have then an effect on ancestral land, ancestral domain, on even things like graveyards or food areas, areas designated for food security. The very nature of agriculture, industrial versus organic, industrial versus community led, where industrial agriculture like plantations can lead to expulsion and displacement of local communities and indigenous peoples. Special focus on indigenous peoples because all over the world, they're the ones that are the strongest and the best environmental defenders. But they're also the weakest and most, or democratic at least. Our economics followed neoliberal economics. Private sector, globalization, foreign investment, none of which are wrong in themselves, but they become wrong when they are development aggressors. When a private company that might be a good company becomes a development aggressor, uses bribery to get land, uses bribery so that they will not be regulated, or when you have foreign corporations, American, Japanese, and now a lot of Chinese corporations that come that do not intend to follow the law and do not respect human rights, then of course social conflict will follow. And if your government sides with the aggressors or is the aggressor themselves, no? My first case as a lawyer was defending the indigenous peoples of Mount Apo against a geothermal plant that was being proposed right at the center of the sacred area, in a protected area, legally not allowed. But the government, it was a government project, the government changed the rules. In the middle of the conflict, we used the law, because we use the law, I use the law. I don't believe in violence. Let's be very clear about that. I've been red tag also, but I don't believe in violence. I believe in using the law. I believe in using ideas, in persuasion. I'd like to think I'm very persuasive. In that case, the government changed the law in the middle of the fight so that they would win in the Supreme Court. Very unfair. That's part of development aggression. You don't respect the rules. You don't respect rule of law. And of course, in development aggression, the weakest are the ones that are targeted the most. Indigenous peoples, because they're marginalized, they're in remote areas, they don't speak the language of power, don't have the documents that power recognizes, like land titles. And then the other ones, and I would like to mention that because yesterday we celebrated Women's International Day, and this month is the Women's Month. Women environmental defenders are also targeted everywhere with misogyny, with physical attacks. Because development aggressors are worried, are scared of women. Takot sila sa mga babae, luk sila sa mga babae. Very famous, iconic picture of the Kalinga in the Chico River Dam. Pating ang militar with all their guns ready to kill people, ang humarap sa kanila, mga babae na gananaka, bare breast. Takot lang sila, hadlok lang sila. But that was 40 years ago. Ngayon, hindi na sila takot. They would rape you, they would kill you. You have to be extra careful if you were women defenders. We see this problem of development aggression and social conflict and violence. Environmental defenders, I noticed you went through all of this, so bilisan ko na lang siya this part, no? In green areas, forests, critical warsheds, terrestrial biodiversity, wildlife, land issues, no? I mean, it's remote, it's separate, so madali siyang, di ba, walang rule of law in many of these places. So remote. In red there, I have Masungi Reserve. I wanted to tell the story of, there are many places like this in Mindanao, to be honest, but this is Luzon. This is right outside of Metro Manila, one of the best areas that have been preserved in Metro Manila. But every day, the trustees, they're women trustees, and they're also being attacked regularly, and their lawyer as well. It's just incessant, unstoppable. Resort owners, quarry owners, supported by government, supported by police, or, where the police pretend to be neutral because they say it's a land conflict instead of being able to protect nature. This is the reason I said why indigenous peoples are the most attacked, because they're the ones that protect our forests. Ms. Kanoi is here to talk about Kitanglan, and she will tell you that. They're the ones that protect our water supplies, like you have in Kaliwa Dam. They're the ones that protect our wildlife, our biodiversity. They're the ones that give us the option of a better kind of agriculture, an agriculture that is climate friendly, an agriculture that is organic, an agriculture that is self-sufficient. And that's why they're attacked by the interests that they're up against. Blue areas, of course, no? Our seas are threatened, our fisheries are threatened, our rivers and lakes are threatened with pollution, with depletion of resources, with overuse, overproduction, with reclamation, as I have there. Of course, here, let's be very clear, China is our number one enemy in terms of blue resources, because China is destroying several, our biggest areas in our exclusive economic zone in the West Philippine Sea. And unfortunately, this government has not defended us there. And we need to consider that when we elect, who will defend the West Philippine Sea and its resources for us? Because the future of food security of the Philippines, among other things, is in the West Philippine Sea. Reclamation is a big threat all over the Philippines as well. Thankfully, because reclamation is done in urban areas, we haven't seen as much violence as we would see. The violence is seen again in remote areas. But the greatest violence is being done by the Chinese military. And not necessarily to the people, of course, fishermen that go there affected by that, but to the resources that we have. Putting up artificial islands, reclaiming areas, using them for military purposes. That too is development aggression. That's the kind of aggression you have that Russia. You know, part of understanding what's happening in Russia and Ukraine is the issue of gas, the issue of energy, the issue of oil. Whereas many wars, unfortunately, have in the Middle East, for example. And people have to make sacrifices to deal with it. Ground issues, air pollution, water pollution, solid waste, toxic waste. Here, the violence is against the urban poor. And the leaders of the urban poor, when they fight back against companies and the government that cause this pollution and this waste. Sometimes you would have the government do something radical like in Boracay. But most of the time, the government just accepts that this is a fact of life. Instead of building resilient cities, it's those that want resilient cities that are targeted. And then black issues, climate change, my conflict, and indigenous peoples in Mindanao are, for me, the example of black, that existential issues. Climate change, I saw that you had lots of climate justice, so I'm gonna honor that, but I just wanna show a couple of pictures from as I said, I work a lot on climate change. It's my main sort of day job. I have several day jobs though. But it's very personal to me because climate change will destroy many of our small islands, and that's Camiguin, my own ancestral island. My grandfather comes from there. Many of our coastal areas. You know, the Philippines is not a small island state, but the Philippines is a nation of many small islands. And we just saw that in Odette last year, in Mindanao, from the Surigao provinces to Dinagat, to Siargao Island, to Bohol, to Leyte, Southern Leyte, to Negros Oriental, Negros Occidental, and Palawan. Imagine that. And unfortunately, even as the government recognizes this as a problem, but when we say it's a climate justice problem in the Philippines, also between the rich and the poor, between corporations and communities, between indigenous peoples and those that would invade their land. When we say that, ayaw ng gobyerno yon. You're already a rebel, you're already a communist when you raise climate justice as a domestic issue. But it is, as it is a personal issue, intergenerational. This is also a justice issue between me and you, you're younger than me, and between you and your children, and the kind of world you will live them. And it is, let me change my this one, Kanoi would be familiar with. And it's a justice issue, climate justice issue between generations and between species. That's Mount Kitanglad in Bukidnon. endemic with so much species, including with so much species, people by different Lumad tribes, indigenous tribes of the Philippines, of Mindanao, that could be wiped out by climate change because mountains and coastal areas are the frontiers of climate change impacts. Mining, of course, is a big issue localized in specific areas. In Mindanao, you will be faced with a big mining issue in the months to come, with Tampakan mines possibly starting to be built this year. If the province of South Cotabato lifts its ban on mining, it's the only thing that's standing. Basically, the only standing between the Tampakan mine being built, the biggest mine in Mindanao and the Philippines, that will threaten us because of climate change and earthquakes, threaten not just South Cotabato, but all of certainly the southern Mindanao region. Also will cause a lot of emissions for carbon. That particular mine, the only thing that's stopping it are the 7 or 9 provincial board members of South Cotabato, who is set to decide on lifting the ban against open pit mining in a week or two, I think, or in a few weeks. But mining is a black issue because it can lead to very existential. I know that because I have managed a lot of mining disasters for the government. And you don't want to see what a mining disaster looks like and what it destroys. You don't want to see that. Similar also with a nuclear power plant. You know, of course, if it can be safely done, why not? But if it cannot be safely done, that is a black issue also. And then finally, I would like to talk about the Lumad in Mindanao and the work that I have done with them as a segue to my last point, which is about the justice system. Sorry. I'm going to change now this is my final background to change. The complete, if you see there are 3 people there, there should be actually 5. 2 of them were my clients, Chad Book and Jurain, Chad and Jurain. And Daday is a woman on the third. They all serve the Lumad communities in several parts of Mindanao. They've served them as teachers, Daday as a health worker, and they were killed last week. We think they were executed. I am sure that they were not armed. They are not NPAs. I'm sure about that. But they were killed last week. I just came from Cebu to talk to the parents of Chad to look at our options in terms of justice, because we cannot allow environmental defenders to be killed without resorting to justice. And that's what I would like to talk as the last part of this talk. I mean, and the justice system and the limits of the justice system. But why we should not give up? Sorry. Why we should not give up on the justice system? I don't think my colleagues in the Philippine Judicial Academy were all appointed by the Supreme Court. I mean, I don't think my colleagues are in the Supreme Court. I have colleagues there that I have taught with, former bosses, close friends who are there in the Supreme Court also. I don't think they would disagree with me when I say that we don't have a very good justice system in the Philippines. There's no expectation of being able to get justice for many things. Some things, sometimes if you're lucky, yes. And I call it justice initially because the justice system begins with the police and the military. It begins with enforcement. It includes prosecution and the defense bar, then the judiciary and all the levels of the judiciary. And unfortunately, we have different challenges. We have challenges of incompetence, of incapacity, of lack of equipment, lack of training, especially at the police level. We also have clear-cut examples of simply disregarding the rule of law, disregarding rules. For example, when arresting people or in searching houses and homes, not following very basic rules that I teach in my constitutional law classes all over the Philippines. The rules are, I have many policemen, by the way, that are my students in the law schools and in Ateneo School of Government. And I tell them, you know the rules. There is no, you know the rules. You cannot arrest a person unless the warrant is very clear, the name is very clear, the description is very clear. You do not make arrests in the middle of the night. You do not search houses in the middle of the night. Now you can only arrest if you have a camera. That's now a requirement of the court. You cannot issue an arrest warrant outside of your jurisdiction. That's a new rule also by the Supreme Court. So the rules are good, but the implementation is bad for either incompetence. And incompetence here is either lack of capacity, lack of equipment, or there's political economy behind incompetence because it favors, them that would seek to oppress others, to marginalize others, that they would not follow the rules. So the goal is to make people follow the rules. The goal is to make enforcers follow the rules. Then it goes to the judiciary, and the judiciary is challenged also by the same issues. Relatively better people in the judiciary now, it's a very good career, well paid to be a judge in the Philippines. Now a well-paid career. Before it wasn't well paid. But also a challenge in terms of training. That's what we do in the Philippine Judicial Academy. That's why we have a bench book that tells them what the laws are. But there are inherent issues like delay, for example. I have a case that meets only once a year. Can you believe it? The trial is once a year. And people are detained pending conviction or acquittal. So sometimes you are in prison for 5 years without being convicted and then acquitted. And then you lost 5 years of your life. That is 5 years of your freedom. I mean, the people I know are some of the best and the bright in the Philippines, like student activists that they make use of those 5 years. And one of them, for example, not a political case, not an environmental defense case, but a hazing case. When he was finally released, he went to the US to study penal justice, criminal justice, and it's now one of the top thinkers in the world on how to run prisons. Quite an impressive, from the University of the Philippines, really quite impressive what he has done. But still wrong to be in jail for 5 years without being acquitted, without being convicted. And then, of course, you count the appellate all the way to the Supreme Court. The whole case can last from 10 to 20 years before it gets resolved. And that's our challenge for environmental defenders, kasi environmental defenders need the justice immediately because it's not just them that is at stake. Environmental defenders, they were sent to try to see if we can rebuild the Lumad schools. 200 plus schools were closed down by the Duterte government. Really good schools. I've looked at the curriculum. Really good schools, all recognized by DepEd. Great teachers, amazing teachers. I know them. Many of them are my clients. Amazing administrators. All red tag, all accused of communist terrorists, being recruiters without evidence. Every single case filed against my clients, we have dismissed. Every single case. Not one survives because there is no evidence, there's no truth to the accusation. So that's a problem with delay because these schools, these people that we are trying to defend are defending something that is being destroyed right now as we speak. And so we need to figure out how to get the justice quicker through the legal system. And let me emphasize that again, because I'm a lawyer. I believe in the kingdom of the word. There needs to be reforms legally, judicially, legislatively, like an Environmental Justice Act, for example, Environmental and Climate Justice Act, so that we're able to do this faster, more efficiently, and in favor of the defender. And here's where faith and faiths come in, and I will end now. Faiths and faith are important because that is where all of this is going to eventually converge. The beautiful thing about working with indigenous peoples for more than, since I was a lawyer, but even before that, 35 years already, 32 years as a lawyer, 3 years as a law student that was already active with indigenous people's rights all over the world, is its experience of beauty, the experience of God or of gods. It's the experience of being part of nature. Ang sarap katrabaho yung mga katutubo. The indigenous peoples, the Moro peoples also, because I work also with Moro peoples and teach a lot of Moro peoples also. All this year, it's such a beautiful experience. The culture, the colors, the faith. Faith is centered. Maybe different gods, but to me, they're all eventually just one God. And my God is also the God of my Moro brothers and sisters and the God of my Lumad, the gods of my Lumad brothers and sisters. And that's what makes environmental defense a sacred thing, not just a technical thing, not just a professional thing. It's a vocation, it's a mission, it's a call. And I invite you, since I noticed that many of you are students and young, I invite you, you don't have to be a lawyer, you can be a scientist, you can be a natural scientist, a social scientist, you can be a teacher, you can be an activist, you can be whatever you want to be. As long as it is good for society and useful for society, you have a place. This is your faith, and you must have faith. Thank you very much.
The correspondent to his name. They're off to Miarayon. I think Dean is quite familiar also with Miarayon. And interestingly, first time, we will be expecting 4 tribal lawyers there. One is the president of Integrated Bar of the Philippines. So it is only this year and this term that we have Taguluanan Bukidnon as president of the IBP. And with him, Attorney RB, Attorney Lagamon, who is present as Dato Matukaw Magpadayag because of his virtue. Eventually, then if you visit again Kitanglad, because for the information of everyone, so my background is Mount Kitanglad. Although I open up about the issue in Mount Kalatungan, where 4 lawyers are there, and we do hope that RD Burgos would also be there. So this is the first time 4 lawyers will be discussing the issue of the encroachment of private and other investments in ancestral domain. My NGO, the Kitanglad Integrated NGO, established in 1995 to bridge relationship with the state, the government, and the indigenous people. Otherwise, if no one's working in between to mediate the conflicts, understanding even the wisdom of the government and the people, the indigenous people, you won't be able to find solutions that are acceptable to both sides. Interestingly, as what Dean also highlighted in his presentation. So actually, Dean, my presentation is following the energy of your input and the way you discuss about the issues, because I think my task here, not just to react, but actually to also put everyone on the ground, because your discipline is law, legal. I studied law for 2 years at Xavier, but since I had conflicts with my class, I often get insulted, and I was told by my professor, I would remember sternly, si Attorney Dasa said before, and but that was my classmate, that you really have to figure out, do you want to be a lawyer or an anthropologist? And I decided, yeah, I want to be an anthropologist and a lawyer. Wanted to be a legal anthropologist. So we had, my inspiration was Owen Lynch. I think Dean will also remember him. And he'd written also accounts on justice system and all the studies about the indigenous justice system. And I think eventually, thank you for organizing this talk. It's also very timely, not just for International Women's Month and International Women's Day yesterday. Yesterday, I was also in Sungko, the place of the Taraandig. So for the information, everyone familiar with Mount Blood Range Natural Park, established as a permanent protected area. So what does it mean? No mining, no logging, no energy exploration. The impact of Republic Act of the NIPAS, 7586, and it was already enhanced into a NIPAS covering an additional 140 protected areas. So the Philippines started with experiment with 10 protected areas. That's I'm part for Kitanglad. It's my home court. And then after finishing my project with World Bank, I chose to stay because I knew that there's so much to learn from indigenous knowledge, perspective, and way of life, and that modernity and our consciousness, since we are schooled with the colonial education, we do not believe in cultural solutions. And I'm glad that Dean also mentioned, articulated a lot about indigenous people. I was trying to look for your pictures, Dean, with your class. So it's good to have Dean Tony to be a professor in law and whatever, international law, even in climate, because with his passion, he can easily transform everyone to think about your options for the future. Would you want to be the side to care for the remaining forest, or be on the side that the purpose is business, money, and really development? As of now, I've reserved the picture. I have not transferred it from my phone. So it's a protected area. You didn't see the map. I have prepared a slides from the DNR, but I just give you a background of first of my work as an anthropologist. So I've been here since in Mindanao in 1990, actually in 1987, before I studied law. And I choose to work in Mindanao because we have about 18 major tribes, and I found out with so much expression of even minority groups. There's more than 18 tribes. Here in Bukidnon, we are to have 7 tribes, but there's 2 other minor tribes unrecognized, and they're trying to their group be recognized by government, but as far as I know, even in Pamulan, they only recognize 7 tribes. So that's also another issue in terms of people, how they identify themselves, and how the public and all of us also identify who they are and their history. So very timely to talk about the justice system because I don't know how to come in, and I thank the impulse and the passion, the energy of Dean on me. So I would react in terms of the spirituality. If I may allow to share screen, I want to walk you through Kitanglad briefly because I want to maximize the opportunity for able to share. So have you seen the slide?
Yes, yes.
Okay. We have a book called The Wisdom Keepers of Mount Kitanglad. It covers only 3 areas. That is Lantapan for the Talandig tribe, in which I mentioned I was there for the kinship anniversary. The kinship between the IPs and the Moro, because they believe they descended from one common ancestor and they just kind of parted ways. We're part of the IPs embrace Islam. That's why we have Muslim Moro people. And then the other is Higaonon, close to Cagayan de Oro. And then the Bukidnon, the Bukid people. And they identify themselves by reference to a mountain, to a river. So I'm working with the Bukidnon. Strada is Bukidnon Tagaluanon of reference to Tagaluan River. So that's how tribes connect themselves. So if I may be allowed to share about faiths, and justice system because thanks to the inspiration of Owen Lynch and some of our lawyers, Ipat Luna, Dean Tony, Nonet Royo, they believe that the indigenous justice system do have a space in terms of our justice system, but only very few give importance of to study this aspect of knowledge. So that's why our knowledge is very partial. But if we do have a law course that opens indigenous knowledge system, then perhaps in the future we would have lawyers that would specialize on indigenous jurisprudence, indigenous justice system. I do look forward to that. Not only anthropologists, but anthropologists also study law and bring out the specialization on indigenous justice system. So, that's Kitanglad. There's a peak na may antenna. So that's the Kitanglad peak. The other one is the second highest peak is Dilanglang. They do have the tribal names just like Mount Apu. And then when Dean mentioned about him, part of the Mount Apu advocacy, that was my starting point also to wake up and not just look at the anthropological aspect in the IP work, but actually looking at to be an environmental defender. That's also my wake up call moment. And then you were, I think, probably with IPAT as well. Before, they were rallying for Mount Apu because for the tribe, the Mount Apu Natural Park is actually Apu Sandawa. It's the sacred ground of a grand ancestor, Apu Sandawa. Kitanglad will speak more of Apu Agbibilin. So it has its legends. And then we were with the civil society, working indigenous people. So by consequence, you get to listen to their stories, you interact with them personally. And to them, the Apu Sandawa is a sacred mountain. And then to convince the elder, imagine the development aggression that Dean Tony mentioned, starting with the dam, the Kalinga, that really also becomes a monumental event for environmental defense in the Philippines. They brought him to Manila just to show development. Apo, if it's Turagaba pag mention siya ngalan, because the tribes will not mention the names of their passed away ancestors. And he said like, oh, come to see Manila and see the buildings and all, the network, the station. But for the eyes of indigenous people, what does he see in a civilization that promises development? Coming from a very forested country like Mount Apu. I said, how come there are beggars? In their village, no beggars. And then so much, not natural because, naman the buildings. And he just said, when it was time for him to speak his piece, why they are resisting the Philippine National Oil Company geothermal exploration in their mountain, he said that he talks about the dimension of faith. He said, your sacred spaces are made by hands. Look at your churches, your chapels. Tapos ang dawa is a gift from Magbabaya or Manama for the Manupo. So once it is destroyed, it cannot be rebuilt again. So it's good for your churches, the structures, it can be rebuilt over and over again. That's why even if you correspond the number, the money that you will pay us just to say yes, definitely the answer is no. And I'd rather die than seeing the day that the first machine will puncture Sandawa, puncture the mountain. So if you're with the indigenous people, they refer nature as something like it has a personality. It has a human face. It's not, even though a lot of it's invisible to our naked eye, but I think when we were being colonialized, that basically cut our innate relationship with nature. But for the indigenous people, the unschooled, they said that that's our life, that's our cathedral, that's our market, that's our university. And until now, that perspective is also strengthened by Dr. Vic Saway. He is an anthropologist, but he also a chieftain of Talaandig. He actually initiated the IP Moro kinship. It's been the 11th year of celebration. So we have Muslims coming into Sungko. They spent at least overnight to mingle with the Talaandig and celebrate what is good. There was no divider. There was no reference to a Muslim, to a Cristiano, the settlers, and the indigenous people, all united because we honor the history that there had been a war. So that's very important to remember. And Kitang as a space wherein it is a cultured space, but we are also, we stay here in Malaybalay, it's part of Kitang Lad. So that's how important it is. I wanted to show you this, how relevant is Kitang Lad. So as a anthropologist, how do you capture the invisible elements? Because what we see here, when you take picture, oh, that's the central Malaybalay city. But for the indigenous people of the Talandig, Bukid na Nagaon, it's a sacred space. Nothing to argue of that. And you look at Malaybalay, it's such a small space but dominating the land use of Tanglad. So, many of you are, I think, in the legal field and challenged by Sir Tony, but I will further challenge you with the events of the present. As of now, on the left side, that's the territory of the Bukidnon. And the peak towards Impasugong, it's more Higaonon, towards Cagayan. And then the south is Talaandig, connecting to Merayon. That's why if you hear the word Kitkat, Kitanglad Kalatungan, or Kitkal, because I wanted also that the public will get to understand that the rich ecosystems that we enjoy, they're actually indigenous protected forests, not because of the NIPAS law, but we have cultural masters and elders. And the work of kin, being anthropologists, is really to document. And there's such a term as open knowledge and closed knowledge. Tacit knowledge, implicit knowledge. So when we study in our usual education, I think what we studied more are explicit knowledge. That's why our intuition, the aha moments, our guts, we do not listen to it. We have a class that talks about it. That's being basically human. That's why omens are very important for indigenous people in terms of deciding, even in the justice system, when to start or not, especially in cases of murder, transgression, and also the adultery. This high offense in the tribe. And we're lucky. I had the chance to work with Dr. Linda Burton before she passed away. When I studied law, I was working as a researcher under Dr. Burton in the Research Institute for Mindanao Culture. And for just a span of 2 years, we completed a project on indigenous justice system. We covered Talaandig, Mamanwa, and Manobo. But the Talaandig is the Bukidnon side. The Mamanwa and Manobo is in the Agusan and Surigao side. So we do have that literature. It's a report. I think it's in RIMCO, but I don't think it's part of the library of the College of Law at Xavier University. So I studied law for almost 2 years, but wasn't able to complete. So that's where we are. If you're a trekker, why are the council elders praying on top of a stone? Because actually documented, there's a lot of altars around Kitanglad. So since that's the Kitanglad peak, but for us, non-IPs, we step on it and take pictures of the scenario. But we didn't know it was an altar. That's an altar where they put their coins. Some of the altars in the forest, we put our backpacks. And we also, like, if there are coins there, we also, take some coins. What is the problem with our Filipino society? We are democratic society indeed, but our knowledge is not balanced. That's why I said that I choose this path to work with them. And the context that Dean gave about the environmental system and the justice system, because actually the natural resources belong to indigenous people, because that's where the Indak forests are, and it also became a protected area. So once it became a protected area, that's the implication.
a cool or a cold temperature going as low as 9 degrees in December, and it's pretty much called the City of Pines, because it used to be filled with pine trees. During the time that I was going to school in Manila, whenever I come home and pass through Kanoi Road coming up to Baguio, right at the entrance of the road, I could smell pine trees entering the road. So that was a very good memory for me. But at this point in time, 2022, that is no longer the case. Actually, this has been since around 1994 because of the influx of a lot of people to Baguio, and a lot of trees have been cut down to for development, housing, and the like. Especially today, there are a lot of condominiums here already, communities, subdivisions, and somehow the environment is no longer the same as the time when during our younger years. And it is really a sad thing for us, because one of the things that we would prefer is to have a pristine environment. But then again, that is not the case in Baguio anymore. As I was listening to Dean Lavinia's, actually I read yesterday the outline of his supposed lecture. Is that right? A lecture. I really found it interesting, actually, that everything and everything in the system, no, in the biodiversity, are actually related, from our solid waste to our land use to our mining, etc. All of these are tied together and would result, and its proper use would result to protecting our environment. And the way it is now, it is true, as said by Dean Lavinia, that the justice system of our country is not so much, has not moved forward yet for the intense protection of our environment. In Baguio City alone, we have a very recent case of the Santo Tomas Forest Reserve, okay, which was where excavations and building of a road leading to a resort property of an elected representative sometime in 2014 was covered by media. And truly it is sad that a supposed representative or a government officer would by himself and his kin rather violate environmental laws. Now, Mount Santo Tomas is actually known for that program at ABS-CBN, which was called La Presa. Okay, that was where that daily soap opera was shot, and because of this, the interest in Mount Santo Tomas increased, and there were a lot of tourists that came. And of course, because there was no set up for trash disposal, it became a big trash can by itself. And at this point in time, a case was filed by the environmentalists and the interested parties, where presently the Supreme Court had issued a permanent protective order, so that we ourselves as residents of Baguio could not just come up to Mount Santo Tomas, where we used to run, where North Face used to conduct their yearly runs, and other activities as well. So there are a lot to ask for in the enforcement of our laws, of environmental laws here in Baguio City. And I really appreciate the fact that I was invited to this forum. It would be interesting to become an understudy to Attorney Lavinia, because at this point in time, I quite enjoy dabbling in a different practice, because I've always been in land and the labor and the land labor and other private other aspects of private practice. So maybe in my own effort, I would be able to help also protect and implement or enforce environmental laws in this sphere where I am now. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Tomas. Another one is SM in Baguio, and others like in Chico River, wherein our IPs have rallied not to put up a dam, and even residents in Baguio who have rallied not to be to preserve the trees, and it fell on deaf ears and hands. And I was thinking that when we talk of environmental defenders, we do not see the hand of the government in the help that they are doing for this environment. So how are we going to address big companies like the government per se, or like the person of SM in building in our forest or in our protected lands, for example? How are we going to fight this as environmental defenders who do not even have the money or the means to pay lawyers when we are arrested? Ano po ang gagawin natin as simple people who want to defend the environment?
Thank you very much.
I would like to direct the question first to our able speaker, Dr. Lavinia.
Well, that's why it's important to make sure that you have environmental lawyers that are defending environmental defenders. No, we actually are always try to create an environmental defense fund that people can tap on. I mean, for example, the alternative lawyers of the Philippines would have that defense fund. Eventually, you want the government, for example, the public attorney's office, to dedicate some resources for that. You want judges to be able to appoint lawyers that can do that also. As I said, we probably want a new law on environmental justice, environmental and climate justice that can address these concerns. But, you know, totoo yun, it's just very difficult now. I'm very occupied. Well, all pro bono, all free, all my environmental justice cases, but it has to be done.
Thank you,
sir.
Thank you very much. I would like to also to recognize our speaker from yesterday, Mr. Antonio, the managing director of Integrated Forest Management Association, to post his question.
Yes, good morning. I would like to direct my question to Dean Tony. Yes. With if we have to look at the medical field, no po, Dean, nakita natin may specialization, no, So, one thing, please correct me if I'm wrong, pero I'm just under the impression na if we come up with specialized courts to look into environmental and climate concerns, hindi ho ba mas magiging effective rather than get para bang just rely on the courts, the ordinary courts, wherein judges are not really trained to look at at the environment. Perhaps the courts that I'm talking about, itong environmental courts, could have specialized judges who are, say, schooled also in the environmental science. Dean, please help me with
Meron na
this little
pong
term.
we actually we already have those courts. They're called
Okay.
Greek courts that the Supreme Court has designated.
Okay.
Because there's also a special environmental procedure already that the Supreme, in fact, I drafted it with the Supreme Court, that the Supreme Court has promulgated to rule such cases. No? So hindi yan ang problema eh. It's the overall system of justice, but it's very slow. That's very, that's really, so you don't even, the way to solve it is to actually do very significant reform to judicial system.
So, Dean, you're trying to tell us that it's really a justice system revamp ang kailangan natin.
Yeah, that's what's needed.
Okay. Thank you very much, Dean.
Thank you very much po. I think we have another very important question posted in the chat box. Sir Dean, and of course, any of our reactors may answer the question. So, Michael Caronan is asking and posing this question because the Philippine House of Representatives passes the Single-Use Plastic Products Regulation Act, and it is reported to have voted unanimously last July 28, 2021 to prohibit the production, imports, and sale of many single-use food packaging products. If the bill goes on to pass in the Senate, non-compostable plastic products like plates, cups, cutlery, expanded firm wraps, and all of this would be phased out within 4 years, and other products such as straws and bags thinner than 10 microns within 1 year. Now, our current situation has a staggering 2.7 million tons of plastic waste that are generated in the Philippines each year, and an estimated 20% end up in the ocean. This is the sources from the PSA. While total employment generated by all manufacturing establishment reaches 1.2 million in 2014, of this, 98.6% were paid employees, while the rest were working owner and unpaid workers. Now the questions are you in favor of the Single-Use Plastic Products Regulation Act? And would this proposed act can truly address our issues of plastic waste ended up in the ocean and in our water canals? And the last question is, how can we set the equilibrium with the affected manufacturing industry, the ordinary workers of the plastic materials within the Philippines? Now, again, I hope the questions are understandable.
I look at the question. Of course, the answer is yes. And the answer to the third is the kailangan lang ng just transition. You have to make sure na people are not affected negatively by environmental laws. That people that are polarized, diba, like workers, hindi pwede yun. You won't get the support from the people if you do that. But yes and yes for the first two questions. But the third, all environmental issues, climate issues, there needs to be a just transition where the poor does not suffer, does not bear the cost of the change.
Thank you very much po, Dean. May we ask from the other reactors if you have other comments? Okay, I think Ma'am Kanoi is want to give an additional comment. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. Actually, I'm going to respond from the philosophy and perspective of the tribe. That's why we treat nature as part of them. Okay, like so the pollution actually is a problem of habit, a problem of use. So Anna, she builds the heritage center. She saw some plastics there, and she said, "Before you're gonna start, can you pick up anything cash in your territory?" And turns out that the plastic are the things that they bought from the lowland, from the city. But this is just a recent phenomenon when the Heritage Center was built. That's why we also have that policy of the garbage. But it's not just changing the action, but what is Earth? Talabunta, the spirit of Earth, taking care of us. And Earth has virtue. If you're good and bad, it's still gonna feed you. Plants that nourishes the human being feeds the good and the bad. So there's an indigenous philosophy there hidden in caring for nature. If we do have that in our heart, I have friends in the environment circle and network trying to minimize really what we throw away. So the practice questions. And they even tell me like, no editing in the translation. Chai. So that's the thing. When you go into the deep dive, it's actually not, the thirst for knowledge is there, but it had to be compensated in rediscovering the meaning of the purpose, why you are here. Because you cannot be an advocate for the environment if or the dagat or to the pollution that was mentioned. Because for Bai, what manifests in your being are your spirit guides in nature. The spirits guide in nature. Kaming Katoliko, isa lang yung spiritong guardian angel. And when Bai educated me on that, and it was a good thing because I was also into energy healing. That's also my other discipline because my lolo is an albularyo. He's into faith healing and he talks to animals. So I knew that from my ancestors into natural healing. And there you are with indigenous people. So healing is also like not just of illness, but having a sense of purpose and direction. So when you do this as a course, make sure your intentions are clear. Kasi if you just have a course to show that their IPs are there, and we still stifle, because what are the opportunities there? Example, in the same you, they're still not giving the caddies to the claimants there. The wish of the people there is that sana CMU can open a space for a tribal school. In the tribal school, the cultural masters can orient their college students, their high schools. We have high school, tribal schools, and they learn from their perspective before they are being brought in to our usual educational perspective. Is this going to happen? If this will not happen if we don't feel the future possibilities for a just future. Remember, we continued the discrimination, the arrogance, because we do not feel their pain. We do not feel their visions and hopes. And somebody else wanted to put, what you call this? A hanging train in the intact forest. But for the Babaylan said, no way. Di pwede. Not because of complying with the taxes and all. She was looking at the rights as well for the invisible beings. Are we prepared for that? Because if you're just gonna have this as an interest and inclination, but if you're willing to go deeper, because every elders will bless you, and perhaps they might see your other spirits connected with nature. That's why you can understand some people, passion nila is really dagat. It's really dagat. Ang water spirit niya daw malakas. Others, when they cry, when earth is being, gihukay for mining, yung earth spirit mo is strong. And some other things. So nature is communicating to us. So there should be an openness anything, any religion or any spirituality, but it's a basic. That's why feel it's really a challenge to take the deep dive, because remember I mentioned the open knowledge and the closed knowledge. The ones that they are sharing to us in the book are just open knowledge. Right now, we continue the cultural profiling with the help of DNR, the Park Superintendent, and the Biodiversity Management Bureau, and the ICCA, the NCCA, I mean. And we covered 43 altars from 60 cultural experts. And we have not covered them because we've done it in 3 months lang kasi walang funding. And the report is there. It's a continuation din. Can you imagine that? But they say wala nang pondo to share the report. So we will
Thank
continue
you.
advocating.
Yes.
So be prepared and then be guided with hagkap. Don't forget, the rule of the Bailan is hagkap. Do things when you feel it's light, it's right, and it gives you brightness. It's bright. That's hagkap rule when you do things.
Thank you very, very much po, Ma'am Kanoi, for enlightening us, for inspiring us, actually. And of course, to Dean Lavinia for that very much extensive answer. So we are actually urging the participants from Masenlok to give their comments or to ask their questions regarding their environmental issues in their community. Okay, we have two more questions posted, and we would like to hear from Attorney Andres if to answer any of this question. An organization, the SIP, they are asking if the SIP National would like to ask if how environmental engineers can be best service to bridge proponents and the stakeholders. What are the protocols that you recommend to facilitate partnership? And if I may also connect this question to the next question, recently Duterte has signed EO number 164, which would pave the way for the government to tap nuclear power as an alternative source of energy, despite safety concerns. With this, what is your stand as an advocate of the environment? Does using nuclear power plant really affects the environment, even with government strict regulation? So we would like to ask our environmental lawyer, Attorney Andres, to answer any of those questions, ma'am.
Okay. Dean?
Ma'am Andres, you are being muted, ma'am. You are muted po. We
Can
cannot
start.
hear you po.
I can start muna.
Okay, sure. Maybe we can ask first, Sir Lavinia po. Opo,
Well,
sir.
the answer is simple. Can it be done safely or not? Can it be safely done? Di ba? Kasi Bataan or wherever you put it in the Philippines, there's a lot of people around those areas. So I have to be assured na 100% accident proof. 100% no possibility of any kind of
Leakage.
and I don't think anyone can give that to me. Not the government, not the Kailangan 100% kasi pag mag-accident ka sa Bataan, for example, you have to evacuate all of Central Luzon. Yan, sinabi na kanina ni wala na si attorney yung from Baguio. Napuno na yung Baguio. All of us will have to transfer to Baguio. Lahat ng taga Central Luzon pupunta ng Metro Manila at pupunta ng Baguio. Even Metro Manila will be threatened by an accident in Central Luzon. Diba? So parang and for me it's not whether Filipinos can run a nuclear power plant because there are Filipinos who can do that. But Filipinos, in my experience, are not very good in managing disasters. We're not very good in evacuating people. You have to evacuate tens of millions of people if there's an accident in Ariban. We're not very good at doing that. Some would say, ilagay natin sa Mindanao, mas lalo na. That the densities of people is also quite a lot, diba? Theoretically speaking, if you're all interconnected, which doesn't make sense now, nakita mo yung nangyari sa Bohol, You can put it in a small island. Pero kawawa naman yung mga taga small island na yun. Pero sige na lang, parang it's easier to evacuate an island of 10,000 people than to evacuate an island of 40 million people. Diba? Like Luzon has 40, maybe more, 60 million people. And you have to evacuate half of that. So it really doesn't make sense, to be honest. I mean, and especially because there are so many other options na renewable.
Thank you very much po, Dean Lavinia, for clarifying that too. And of course, so we were supposed to, we are asking also Attorney Andres, our environmental lawyer from Baguio. Ma'am, you are muted, ma'am. That's why we couldn't hear you a while ago. All right. Okay, good.
I actually joined Dean Lavinia that there are other renewable energy options that we could take, like solar, and there has been a lot being used here in Baguio now. And I believe so. I've been to Botolan recently, and there is a company there, not actually a startup company, an international company that is slowly developing technology for which provides an alternative to energy source, and using the nuclear power plant actually threatens
Are you willing to take a deep dive into the indigenous knowledge systems? Because you're now dealing with implicit tago na knowledge. Because their customary tradition is oral. So tayo, mahilig tayo ng document.
Actually, and because of this, there will be a difficulty for us to move if and when something goes wrong with the power plant. Insofar as the environmental engineers, I suppose, involving themselves in these kinds of forums and organizations that contribute to, or rather, are for the protection of the environment, of course, would help a lot in improving our environmental laws. Thank you.
Thank you very much po, ma'am, Attorney Andres. Yes, indeed, that is very true. I think we still have a few more minutes before we can really wrap up this Q&A portion. Now, if it's okay with our panel of speakers, if I can still ask this two last questions. Unfortunately, the participants from Senlok was not able to post their question. But anyway, we believe that all questions matter. So let me read one of the questions, our last questions. How could we stop the unlawful sale of ancestral domains made by the IP claimants to certain individuals? How would be the possible liabilities of the parties under the law? And if I may connect this to the other question, in achieving the sustainable future, what are the some biggest hurdles our country is facing, and how does it tackles these obstacles? So basically, there is a question there of IP claimants, and then of course our some biggest hurdles our country is facing right now. So how can we overpass these obstacles? So we can ask any of our speakers and to answer this question.
Okay, maybe I can start to answer.
Okay, ma'am. Yes po.
Okay, Kin works closely with DNR when we started in 1994. So one of the pendulums I encountered asked me, because our DNR was subjected to a cultural penalty, Usala. And he was asking me like, Shari, how would you be able to identify a fake dato, a fake IP, a fake claim? Wow, like tough question, you know. That's why here in Kitanglad, we work with IPs They are not yet converted. The spirituality is indigenous. And if by permission we are allowed to document, we document and we share and we bridge information. Because that's why we get it's blurry, because how would we know if the data is not fake? And like the areas in Daraguyan, some of those who are asserting titles are angry at BAI because they wanted it to be leased by Del Monte. What are their motivations? Of course, 25,000 per hectare times 5 years in advance payment. That's the Bukidnon price for the plantations here. And I was just about to tell them that in Marilog, near Davao, 500,000 per hectare. But you have that forest in your backyard. So whatever the money value is, ano yung nakakapag-move sa heart mo, ang very important na we need to understand is that if itong mga kitang Laag, Bukidnon, Higanon sees the force in terms of piso value or dollar value, wala na tayong Mount Kitanglada. Wala na tayong Mount Kalatungan, wala na tayong Mount Pantaron. The intact forest, the remaining intact forest in Bukidnon. And Mount Matigsalag, that's the one connecting to Davao. So, kaya nga ang challenge ni Dato Makapukaw, how can they penalize the trekkers organized by a Manila adventurer? Pumasok sa Kitangla, nag-backdoor. Walang ritual, walang permit. And then posted in Facebook. And what was allowed to enter are only 50 capacity, but there were 53. Okay, so the problem for us is we do not know. That's why Makapukaw said, and the Babaylan said, how can we penalize an ignorant person? So they say they are also partly accountable because how much knowledge is being shared? How much of us also invest on indigenous knowledge? Wala tayong tiwala sa indigenous justice system. Baka anthropologists and mga environmental lawyers. There should be a norm that we will include this in our basic knowledge. As the indigenous education, the basic opens door for IP education. It doesn't mean IP na education graduate. Hindi. We have the cultural masters, we have the Balignao, the tribal teachers, the Gugud, the historians, the Balaghusay, the lawyers of the tribe, the justice system of the tribe. We don't see them as an intact institution. Unless we have that respect, probably, basically, be able to say, at saka yung mga papel naman, let the court run its, as what Dean Tony said. But it will be really a long slate to find justice. That's why yung work namin with IUCN is really Forest for a Just Future. First, focus namin ang IP and local communities who are really custodians of the forest. Sila yung at the front. Wala nga silang SSS, walang GSIS, walang insurance. Ay, climate insurance, pero wala pa tayong ganung mechanism. Why? Because the knowledge is so limited. And the government institutions, depende sa background niya, kung may CSO and geo background siya, open siya. Pag hindi, wala. Kasi yun ang product na education, develop the forest. So, basically, analyze also the kind of first that rin, di ba? So,
Ma'am Kanoi, I think your internet connection is a bit lagging. Nag-choppy po kayo, Ma'am Kanoi? Okay. Unfortunately, there is... Yes po. So, yes, in the interest of time, we really are very grateful to all our speakers for their tremendous effort in sharing their expertise with us and for sharing their advocacies. Unfortunately, we cannot ask the other question posted in the chat box.
I've already spoken too much already. So yun lang. Amping, padayon, ayaw kahadlok, makadaog taani because we are on the right side. Kato lang.
Thank you. Very short but very meaningful. Thank you very much. So, Ma'am Kano, your very short message of challenge to all our participants po this morning.
Yeah. I would say that thank you for hosting this discussion because it's very relevant. And then if you talk about justice system, remember there's indigenous justice and there's faith, a lot of faith elements in there. And that's why we have to believe that we have connection with nature and we will put this in our lives from then on.
Thank you very much, ma'am. We will put that in our mind and in our heart. Attorney Andres?
Thank you so much for this opportunity to delve into this subject that will affect us and our eventual progeny. I suppose like anything else, it may grow slow, and I believe that the snail will eventually reach the ark. We will eventually reach the ultimate. Thank you.
Very, very meaningful, insightful closing. Thank you very much po. And again, thank you very much to our distinguished
Ayun eh. Dean Tony, I didn't orient him on the coming of the class. But the babaylan was prepared and they made an offering and everybody participated. And they are in the Heritage Center. And of course, having worked with her more than 20. Dean, ma-recall mo yung pictures nun. She was keenly listening. The Africans, when they found out they're dealing with shaman, kababaylan, wanted to say like, translation. So that's the thing. When you go into the deep dive, it's actually not, the thirst for knowledge is there, but it had to be compensated in rediscovering the meaning of the purpose, why you are here. Because you cannot be an advocate for all the pollution that was mentioned. Because for Bai, what manifests in your being are your spirit guides in nature. The spirits guide in nature. Kaming Katoliko, isa lang yung spiritong guardian angel. And when Bai educated me on that, and it was a good thing because I was